All right, so we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today, huh? Death and the afterlife.
Yeah, no escaping that one, right?
Definitely universal, that's for sure. And we've got some really interesting selections from Baha'u'llah's writings to guide us.
That's right. And you know, what I find fascinating about Baha'u'llah's perspective is how he frames death.
Yeah.
It's not just an ending, it's more like a transformation, like a continuation of something.
I see that theme popping up in these writings a lot, this idea of two lives.
Definitely. The Baha'i teachings talk about two kinds of life, really.
Okay, so like...
There's the physical life, the one we're living right now.
Yeah.
And then there's the spiritual life.
Yeah.
That one's eternal.
So it's not like one replaces the other.
No. More like they're connected, intertwined.
So maybe less like a light switch and more like a metamorphosis.
Exactly. Like, think of a seed.
Okay.
The seed, that's like our physical life.
Finite.
Right? It has a beginning and an end. But inside that seed, there's the potential for something much bigger. When it grows, it transforms.
Into a plant.
Right. And that plant, it keeps evolving, keeps flourishing. That's kind of like our spiritual life, you know?
It keeps going even when the physical is gone.
Exactly.
It's a pretty powerful image.
Right.
But what exactly is it that keeps that spiritual life going after death?
Well, Baha'u'llah tells us it's all about recognizing God and his manifestations.
So it's more than just believing.
Yeah, it's active. It's about seeking understanding, aligning your life with the divine will.
So this recognition, the seeking, it's like the engine of our spiritual evolution.
You could say that, yeah. And, you know, there's a passage that speaks directly to this.
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so Baha'u'llah writes, that life, however, which is mentioned in the books of the prophets, or the chosen ones of God, is the life of knowledge. That is to say, the servant's recognition of the sign of the splendors wherewith he who is the source of all splendor hath himself invested him, and his certitude of attaining unto the presence of God through the manifestations of his cause. This is that blessed and everlasting life that perisheth not. Whosoever is quickened thereby, he'll never die, but will endure as long as his Lord and Creator will endure.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there, but I'm hearing this connection between recognizing God, seeking knowledge, and achieving this everlasting life.
That's right. And you know what's really interesting? Baha'u'llah doesn't shy away from talking about death.
How so?
He actually uses some really vivid language to describe it, not in a scary way, but almost like a step towards true life. He writes, death proffereth unto every confident believer the cup that is life indeed. It bestoweth joy, and is the bearer of gladness. It conferreth the gift of everlasting life.
It's almost like death isn't about extinguishing a flame, but more like releasing it.
I like that.
Setting it free from its earthly container.
Yeah, beautiful. And it makes you think about what that release might lead to, you know, what possibilities might open up.
That's a good question. So if death is a gateway, what's waiting on the other side? What does existence look like after we die, according to these teachings?
Well, the afterlife, as Baha'u'llah describes it, it's incredibly beautiful. And the soul, it doesn't just stop growing. It keeps learning, keeps developing.
So it's like this realm of constant spiritual evolution.
Exactly. And, you know, he even talks about encountering prophets, chosen ones.
Wow. It sounds almost like
being welcomed into this amazing spiritual community.
Yeah, like that. Surrounded by those who have achieved these incredible levels of enlightenment. Makes you wonder what that would be like.
It does. There's a passage that really captures this feeling.
Oh, please share it.
He says, blessed is the soul which, at the hour of its separation from the body, is sanctified from the vain imaginings of the peoples of the world. The maids of heaven, inmates of the loftiest mansions, will circle around it, and the prophets of God and his chosen ones will seek its companionship.
Wow, that's an incredibly vivid image. It makes you think, with this concept of continued spiritual growth, do our actions here really matter? Like, do they have an actual impact on our experience in the afterlife?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And a complex one. The Baha'i teachings do say that our actions in this life, they shape our spiritual standing after death.
But it's not a simple equation, right? Like good deed equals reward, bad deed equals punishment.
It's more nuanced than that. There's this element of divine grace, of forgiveness that's always present, both in this life and the next.
So there's room for change, for growth, even after we die.
Absolutely. But it does raise another question, doesn't it?
What's that?
If our actions have such a lasting impact, how do we navigate that uncertainty? Like, none of us can truly know where we'll end up, right?
Right.
That's where Baha'u'llah's message of humility comes in. And compassion.
Okay, so not judging others.
Yeah, because none of us can truly know what's in another person's heart, or where their path might ultimately lead them.
He actually addresses that directly, doesn't he?
He does. He reminds us about the potential for change, even at the very last moment.
I'm curious, how does he phrase that?
He says, "He should forgive the sinful, and never despise his low estate, for none knoweth what his own end shall be." How often have a sinner attained, at the hour of death, to the essence of faith, and quaffing the immortal draught, has taken his flight unto the concourse on high? And how often hath a devout believer, at the hour of his soul's ascension, been so changed as to fall into the nethermost fire?
Wow, that's powerful. It suggests that even the most righteous can falter.
And that even those who strayed can find redemption.
So much for judging, huh? It really reframes how we should view our interactions with others.
Absolutely. Treat everyone with compassion, with understanding, because every soul is on its own unique journey.
And this actually leads us to something else unique about the Baha'i teachings on the afterlife.
Oh.
This idea of forgiveness, even for those who haven't formally accepted the Baha'i faith.
Right. We haven't even touched on that yet. Lots to explore there.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to pause for now.
Definitely.
We've covered a lot of ground. 2 lives, the transition of death, the soul's journey after, and it feels like we've just scratched the surface of what Baha'u'llah has to say about all this.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
There is.
We'll definitely delve deeper into that idea of forgiveness for non-believers when we come back for part 2. But before we go, I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Ooh, I love those.
So, if the soul has this eternal nature, if it keeps growing, even after death, how does that change how we see our place in the grand scheme of things?
That's a good one. I'll be pondering that for sure. And listeners, we'll pick up right here when we return with part 2 of our deep dive into the Baha'i teachings on death and the afterlife. All right, so we're back, diving deeper into these Baha'i teachings on death and the afterlife.
And last time we were really getting into this whole idea of actions having consequences.
Yeah, it's a complex one, right?
Yeah.
Our choices mattering not just for this life, but for our spiritual standing after we die.
Exactly. And it makes you think about the stakes, but also brings up this idea of the soul itself.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned something about the soul's eternal nature last time.
Right. Specifically, for those who've really embraced Baha'u'llah's revelation, there's this incredible passage that talks about the true believer living and enduring as long as God himself.
Now that one really jumped out at me. Could you expand on that a bit?
Absolutely. So the passage goes like this. "If such be the blessings conferred on all created things, how superior must be the destiny of the true believer, whose existence and life are to be regarded as the originating purpose of all creation. Just as the conception of faith hath existed from the beginning that hath no beginning, and will endure till the end that hath no end, in like manner will the true believer eternally live and endure. His spirit will everlastingly circle round the will of God. He will last as long as God himself will last." Heavy stuff, right?
It's profound, like the spiritual law of conservation. The soul, when it's filled with faith, it becomes linked to this eternal source, this existence beyond time and space.
Exactly. It makes you realize that embracing this faith, it's not just about belief, It's transformative. It elevates the soul to a whole other level, which leads to a pretty big question.
What's that?
Well, if the soul keeps going, keeps evolving, even after physical death, how should that change how we live now?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? If our actions have consequences that echo into eternity, that really changes how we look at things.
Doesn't it? It's like we're not just living for this moment, we're contributing to something much larger.
To a tapestry of spiritual development, something that keeps unfolding long after we're gone.
Exactly. Every moment becomes an opportunity.
For growth, for service.
Yeah, because every human life has value, have purpose. Every soul is a spark of the divine on this incredible journey.
It's like we're each carrying a sacred flame, and what we do, it either dims that light or makes it burn brighter.
Beautiful imagery. Our choices matter, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. And the question becomes, how do we fan that flame?
How do we make sure our actions contribute to this journey, to the good?
Right? It can feel overwhelming. Like, where do we even start?
Yeah.
Well, Baha'u'llah actually offers some pretty practical guidance. He talks about virtues, specific practices that help us grow spiritually and help us make the world a better place.
So it's not just about these big abstract ideas. There are concrete things we can do in our daily lives.
Absolutely.
What are some of those? I'm curious.
Well, one of the most fundamental is cultivating love.
Yeah.
Compassion, unity. These are like the building blocks.
The foundation for spiritual progress.
Exactly. They lead us towards recognizing our shared humanity, our connection to every living thing.
It's about looking past what divides us and seeing the divine spark in everyone.
Right. No matter their background, their beliefs, every interaction, every encounter is a chance to practice that.
It's beautiful. But let's be honest, it's not always easy, is it?
You're telling me
Yeah.
it takes conscious effort, practice, especially in a world that often feels very divided.
So how do we stay focused on that unity, that compassion, when things get tough?
Well, one thing Baha'u'llah emphasizes is prayer, meditation, taking time for that inner connection.
So creating space for stillness, for introspection, to reconnect with our spiritual core.
Exactly. Quieting the noise of the world and listening to the whispers of the heart, that inner guidance.
So it's about balancing those two things, right? The outward actions, the love and service.
And the inward journey, nourishing our souls, guiding our steps.
That balance is crucial. It reminds me of another theme that keeps coming up in these writings.
Oh yeah, which one?
The emphasis on knowledge, on education, not just the material kind, but spiritual knowledge too.
Ah, yes, that's a huge part of it. In the Baha'i teachings, knowledge is power. It's a tool for growth, for progress.
So education isn't just about getting a degree or a job. It's about expanding our understanding of ourselves, of the world, of our relationship with the divine.
Exactly. It's a lifelong pursuit, unveiling the mysteries of creation, contributing to the advancement of civilization.
And service, that keeps coming up too. Service to humanity as an expression of our love for God. What does that look like, practically speaking?
Well, it's about seeing service as an integral part of our spiritual path.
Not just about personal piety.
Right. It's about actively engaging in the world,
Yeah.
contributing to the well-being of others.
Working for the betterment of society.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, understanding that our actions ripple outwards, impacting those around us.
So it can be grand gestures or it can be small acts of kindness. Every bit counts.
Every bit, whether it's volunteering in our community, advocating for social justice, or simply being a loving presence in someone's life.
All of this is so inspiring. It's amazing how the Baha'i teachings weave together so many different strands. Love, knowledge, service, prayer. It's all part of this tapestry of spiritual development. And it continues beyond this life.
It's a beautiful vision, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our lives aren't isolated events. They're part of this grand story, this unfolding of souls evolving, moving towards their ultimate purpose, union with the divine.
It is. But before we go too far down that road,
Yeah.
we need to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. This possibility of forgiveness for non-believers. We haven't really explored that yet.
You're right, we haven't. And it's a fascinating aspect of these teachings on the afterlife.
It is. I'm really curious to hear more about it.
Well, maybe that's where we pick up next time for the final part of our deep dive.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now. Food for thought, for sure.
Definitely.
This idea of the soul's eternal nature, it really challenges us to rethink how we approach life, to see our choices, our relationships in a whole new light.
It does. Because our journey doesn't end with this physical existence. It
Yeah.
extends far beyond that.
It does, and we'll continue to explore that, including this idea of forgiveness for non-believers when we return for the final part of our deep dive into the Baha'i teachings on death and the afterlife.
Until then, keep seeking,
Yeah.
keep exploring, keep diving deep.
Well, here we are, the final part of our deep dive into the Baha'i teachings on death and the afterlife. What a journey it's been.
It really has. We've covered so much ground, from the concept of two lives to the transition of death as a gateway to the soul's eternal nature.
Right. And how our actions here can shape our spiritual evolution in the next life. And last time, we were talking about the idea that even though our choices have these lasting repercussions,
There's still this element of divine grace.
yeah, forgiveness, it feels like such a hopeful aspect of these teachings.
Absolutely. And it leads us to this really fascinating concept, the one we left off with.
Forgiveness for non-believers, right?
Exactly. It's something that truly distinguishes the Baha'i teachings, I think.
Yeah, it does. It almost feels radical. Like even those who haven't formally accepted the Baha'i faith.
They can still find forgiveness.
Yeah, spiritual solace in the afterlife. It's a big idea. How does that even work?
Well, it comes down to this Baha'i principle of the interconnectedness of humanity.
Okay.
The writings talk about divine forgiveness extending to those who are connected to believers, especially through family ties.
So like the spiritual bonds we create in this life,
They have this lasting impact.
it's like this ripple effect of grace even beyond this physical world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, it challenges us to see beyond just our differences in beliefs, to recognize that shared humanity that connects us all.
A message of hope and inclusivity. You know, while we're on the topic of the afterlife, there's something else we haven't really talked about yet.
What's that?
The world of souls. It keeps popping up. It feels kind of mysterious, to be honest.
It is a bit mysterious. It's this transitional state, a realm of purification and preparation.
Preparation for what, exactly?
For the next stage of the soul's journey. You see, it's not quite heaven in the traditional sense.
Right.
But it's not a continuation of earthly existence either. It's this in-between space.
Liminal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in this realm, the soul starts to shed its earthly attachments, becomes more attuned to its spiritual nature.
So it's like a process of adjusting to a new reality.
You could say that. A time for reflection, introspection. The Baha'i writings describe the soul reviewing its earthly life, coming to terms with its actions, and understanding the spiritual lessons it's learned.
It's like a cosmic debriefing, trying to make sense of it all.
Right. And the soul isn't alone in this process. There's guidance, support from spiritual beings, helping the soul understand its progress, preparing it for what's next.
So a kind and gentle hand guiding the way.
Exactly. No judgment, no punishment, just growth, transformation. Which brings up another question, right?
What happens after the world of souls? Where to next?
Well, the ultimate destination, as Baha'u'llah describes it, is the presence of God.
Wow. The presence of God. It sounds otherworldly.
It is. A realm of pure spiritual light, unity. It's a state of being that's hard to even grasp from our limited earthly perspective. But it's a state of infinite peace and bliss.
The ultimate homecoming, emerging with the source of all creation. But how do we get there? What determines our progress towards that union?
It's not about following a strict set of rules. The Baha'i teachings say it's about the soul's capacity for love, its detachment from material things, its yearning for communion with the divine.
So it's less about outward actions and more about
A seat of our hearts.
Yes, that, the purity of our intentions and that deep spiritual longing.
Exactly. It's about cultivating those qualities that draw us closer to God, both in this life and the next. It's a process.
A lifelong process. You know, all of this is incredibly hopeful, this vision of the afterlife, but there's a question I keep coming back to, and it feels a little tough to ask.
What is it?
Well, we've talked a lot about forgiveness, the potential for transformation, even for those who haven't accepted the Baha'i faith.
Right.
But what about those who have done really harmful things in their lives, caused pain and suffering? What happens to them? Is there still justice?
That's a huge question, one that's challenged thinkers for centuries.
It is.
And the Baha'i writings, they don't shy away from that complexity. Justice is an essential part of God. There are consequences for our actions, even while there's forgiveness and mercy.
So it's not a free pass, there's accountability,
Yeah.
even in the afterlife.
Yes, the Baha'i teachings say the soul will experience the consequences of its actions, not as punishment, but as a natural outcome, like the law of cause and effect, but playing out on a spiritual level.
What you sow is what you reap, kind of thing.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part. God's mercy is infinite. Even those who've committed great wrongs have the potential for redemption, for spiritual progress. It's not about eternal damnation. It's about opportunities for growth, for learning, and ultimately for reconciliation with the divine.
It's a powerful message of hope.
It is. And it reminds us that the soul's journey is ongoing, in this life and the next. There's always the possibility for change, for transformation, for healing.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by how these teachings have changed how I think about death and the afterlife. It's not just about what happens after we die. It's about how that understanding can change how we live right now.
That's exactly it. It's a whole new perspective.
It makes you want to live with intention, to cherish relationships, to really work on embodying those virtues that make us better people, that make the world a better place.
And it gives us a new way to look at the mysteries of the soul's journey, from the transition of death to the world of souls and ultimately to the presence of God. It's a journey filled with possibilities, with growth, with this incredible potential for return.
It's been an amazing exploration, and as we close, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If death is just a transition, if the soul's journey continues, how does that change how we think about grief, about loss? How can we support those who are grieving, and how can we navigate our own experiences of loss?
Those are beautiful questions. Questions that each of us will grapple with at some point. May we find comfort in knowing that the journey continues, even when the physical form is gone.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you something to ponder, something to hold on to, and may your own explorations lead you ever closer to the light of truth.
It's been an honor sharing these insights with you. Keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.